says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to preview all the Round 10 action, magic round, as it were, is my good mate, Sixties. How you doing, big fella?
Mate, I'm doing really well, and just a quick shout out to our listeners because we're always amazed with the great following and the people that get in touch about the podcast. So thank you to everyone for listening and for giving us a bit of feedback. Big weekend for us, even though we haven't got rugby league happening in Sydney. Later today, you and I, we're heading out to Parramatta Golf Club for the BGA Golf Day that's sponsored by Para League. So we're looking forward to the luncheon there and catching up with some of the Eels legends and maybe some current staff that'll be out there on the day. We've then, of course, got the big day out at Para Leagues on Sunday with their own version of Magic Round Day 3 with the big outdoor screen and the barbecue facilities and the outdoor bar and the fun activities for the kids. As usual, we'll be inside the club at Jack's Bar and Grill doing our preview of the big match from 5:30, switching to coverage from 6 o'clock for all the interviews with players, coaches, that sort of stuff, and then our instant reaction straight after it. Big weekend, as I said, mate. Big weekend.
Yes, plenty happening, mate. And as always, a quick thanks to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and star partners Narelle and Auburn and Parramatta, making the tip sheet happen week in and week out. Let's get into this.
I should say, mate, hopefully any of the really casual golfers that are hitting the links today have maybe done their practice rounds at Big Swing Golf at Northmead.
It would have been
if
an opportune time to hit the indoor course at Big Swing, tune up, and then get out to the actual links and nail those holes. So yeah, it's a great opportunity there if you had it to use the indoor driving facility there at Big Swing. All right, let's get into our preview 60s. It's easy this week, just the two games for the Eels. Starts off on Saturday, 3 o'clock PM kickoff. Out at North Sydney Oval as part of New South Wales Cup's sort of mini magic round. They've got a battery of games at North Sydney Oval, a battery of games at I believe Blacktown now. It was initially going to be, I can't remember the original venue, but they changed it. Ironbark, aka Redfern Oval. They've been replaced or moved. But in this particular venue, this particular game, the Eels take on the Western Suburbs Magpies. Eels looking to build off a big win over the Newcastle Knights in this grade 60s after a couple of tough outings against the Warriors and Bulldogs in particular. Eels shape up like this at fullback. Dejan Arce on the wings. You've got Isaac Lumilumi and Chris Tupou. Sean Russell drops out of the NRL team where he'll play in the centres in Cup. He's joined in the centres by Zach Sini, Jordan Rankin and Jake Alpha at the halves. Offa Hickey, Ogden, Jirama Masia at the two bookends. Ogden obviously, unfortunately, a victim of troops coming back into the NRL in the shape of Ryan Madison. Manny Luke is a dummy half. Matt Dury, Jack Murchie, and Luca Moretti, the back rowers. On the interchange, Jaden Yates, Tony Matelli, Tavita Taumapenu, and the big hyphen, Jonte Jr., Betham Meza, the lone Jersey Flag player coming up with their bye. They're taking on the Western Suburbs Magpies, Dane Laurie, Will Smith, it's Sean Blaw. I think that's I think Mania Cherrington's played a little bit of NRL too, but they're a team very short on NRL experience and not too many big names there. If I just check the New South Wales Rugby League ladder, the Magpies are actually in the ahead of the Eels. So they're at 5 wins and 3 losses. The Parramatta's 4 wins, 4 losses, and a draw. So this is actually a pretty important game for the Eels to get under their belts, and they did beat them a couple of weeks back, 10-6, in a very, very ugly game.
It was an ugly game, and I should correct myself on the comment before about no football in Sydney. I meant no NRL in Sydney, but of course we have the lower grades. We've had the city versus country matches taking place this week. So, yes, there is footy to get out there and watch. Just no NRL senior football that's out there. But yes, it did surprise a bit to see that the West Magpies were ahead of the Eels on the ladder, and they've had some good wins lately. So I guess it's one of those instances where a team that's the feeder team for the main NRL side has been performing as a unit. I don't know that there's too many players that are necessarily putting the pressure on the first grade team, but they're functioning as a unit. And there's, you mentioned a couple of names there that we are familiar with. It's interesting that Will Smith hasn't been able to put pressure on to come off the bench.
Yeah, he seems like a great fit for the West Tigers off the interchange, and a guy that can play across the back line in the halves, dummy half, lock forward. That's a pretty valuable commodity, but for whatever reason, he's sort of languishing in reserve grade.
What's your take on Sean Blaw too, 40? Because he was someone that I always had quite a lot of time for when he was coming through at Penrith, and then he had that famous blow up with was it Nathan Brown?
Yeah, he had that sort of 2-minute skirmish with Nathan Brown that really catapulted him into the spotlight. But then I think some middling form and some bad luck of injury sort of set him back, and I don't think he's been able to gain any traction since. So it's just that combination of struggling for form, but struggling for form because of injuries too. So
I think the talent's there.
Yeah, and West Tigers, when you're down on your luck as a player, the West Tigers are not a great place to be given their struggles on the macro levels of the team. The support networks,
true.
The support networks to get through it aren't really there.
But talking about struggles as a team, the Eels have had the most bizarre up and down season in New South Wales Cup that I can recall. We're talking about wildly fluctuating form.
Yes.
Wildly fluctuating form. They had a run of really good matches after dropping the first two matches of the year. But one of those early matches was against the Jets where they just got absolutely towed up. And then prior to this weekend, they had two real lopsided defeats to so we had the Bulldogs
28-6.
Yeah, did a number on them, and I'm just trying to think what the other match was.
The Warriors couldn't even bring up half a century, mate. It was only 48-4. That's disgusting for the Warriors. Shame on them.
Yeah,
and the Eels obviously having to travel for an early morning Sunday game over in Auckland with a lot of troops out because of the Darwin week that was there. They had a couple of guys racing back to be there, but between passports and that, there was a reserve grade team essentially, and they got pumped.
Yeah,
but then they bounced back.
I think that the players that did go across were deeply, deeply disappointed in their own performances. So thankfully we saw a major bounce back, albeit against the bottom place Newcastle team in the New South Wales Cup, but they did what they needed to do against them. So it's all very well for any critics to say, "Oh, look at the Knights' form this year. They should have done that." Well, yeah, they should have done it. They did do it. So we can't really ask for anything more. If they got to claw their way back towards a little bit of form, that's the way to go about it. Is you get the job done when you're in matches where you should get the job done.
Yeah, and
we've only because there was the clash, we weren't able to get out to cover that game. We were at Leichhardt Oval for the SG Ball Grand Final when this match was being played up at Kellyville, and it was also good too that there were people like Jordan Rankin who played in this match and then hightailed it out to
to support the SG Ball boys.
Yeah. Well, he's got a coaching.
Well, in official, he was there in official capacity, yes. But between that and the NRL boys also turning up, it was a terrific effort from the senior members of the NRL club to show camaraderie and community for the club.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, and again, we should mention it was what we've seen with the highlights was some spectacular tries and also what looked like, and we've had a bit of feedback about the match as well. Uh, Great form from the likes of Manny Luke for a start, which is something that we wanted to see. Real encouraging form from Dejan Arce. We expect the consistent form that we get from Jake Arthur week in, week out. And he again produced in that regard. And I think we had a try-double from Matt Dury.
Yep.
And some strong form from Jack Murchie as well. So we've got players that we've just rattled off there that may at some stage be required to come up and fill in the NRL team, depending on the circumstances. So good to see that sort of strength in performance. But how they'll go against the West Magpies, when we were speaking earlier in the week in our news episode, I did say to you, I don't know how I can call or how I can make a prediction on how the team will actually perform because it's been so wildly fluctuating. To me, there doesn't seem rhyme nor reason about how they're going to necessarily perform. So, they had that narrow win against the Magpies when they clashed a number of weeks ago. You talked about it was an absolute.
It was ugly as sin,
ugly.
wasn't it? Like, you don't want to talk bad on wins, and obviously you always appreciate a win regardless of how good or bad it was. But that one was certainly one for the record books.
Well, the performance was flat, to say the least.
And it was reflective in first grade too, wasn't it? It was one of those weird days.
Yeah. But by the same token, the Magpies are now ahead of them on the table, and they got the job done against the Magpies. So you'd like to think they'll take something from beating them before, something in the way of confidence from their performance last week. But they just have to go out there and get the basics done.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about it. I mean, it's Captain Obvious stuff, but complete your sets. Get to the kick. Build pressure. They're just the basics of rugby league. And the fact is that at the New South Wales Cup level, let alone at the NRL level, you're halfway towards earning a win as soon as you're getting a higher completion rate. So that has to be the first step for them, because we know that Jake Arthur has an elite kicking game. He can land if they're in the red zone. He can land the attacking kicks wherever he wants to. He's got a long kicking game that it's not quite in the Mitch Moses category in terms of the length of the kicks, but it's not far off. And he's only 20 years of age, so he just getting him to the kicks is critical. We spoke about that with Nathan Brown with the SG ball team, with Ethan Sanders having a good kicking game. He said, well, the key to how they've been going in the finals football was that they were completing the sets and actually getting to the kick. So he was able to utilise the kick. It is so crucial to finish the sets strongly rather than just not getting to. If you've got an elite kicker in your team, you've got to get to that kick. So to me, that's going to be crucial in this game. Forced to make a tip, mate. I reckon the Eels by 4 points again.
Yeah, if the Eels are winning, I don't think they're going to be winning by a huge margin. So I'll tip maybe in the range of 6 to 8 points victory for the Blue and Gold.
Yes.
Which brings us to the main event. So we will. Do you want to do the other teams first, or do you want to do us now?
How about we go into us first, followed by we this week we're going to give our tips for all of the matches, and I think it's important that we go straight into the Eels. we'll wrap up with the other matches, and then we might have a surprise at the end.
All righty, well, let's start with the Parramatta Eels. Unfortunately, as we sort of discussed in our NRL and news podcast with Quint, they're taking place as the final fixture in Magic Round. So bless up on all those knees and ankles and lower leg joints and ligaments. Hoping that chopped up Suncorp turf doesn't come back to hurt us. But they're taking on the Gold Coast Titans. 6:25 p.m. kickoff out at Suncorp Stadium. Eels taking on the Titans. Yes. Titans here got the team. They've got a couple of changes this week. Most in particular at fullback with the AJ Brimson, very talented player, out with what I believe is a hamstring injury. 60s. He had to depart the field last week with Jaden Campbell coming off the bench into the fullback role. Pretty handy player to have on your bench for that sort of injury. And he will take his place at fullback right now as it stands. Although there is some speculation he could move into the halves if Kieran Foran isn't good to go. But right now, Campbell at fullback. You got Cam Pereira and Sami on the wings. Brian Kelly, Jojo Fafita in the centres. Foran and Tanner Boyd in the halves. Mo Fodawaker, Tino Fa'asuma Ali in the front row. Chris Randall is their dummy half. In the back row, David Fafita is on the left edge. Joe Simpson on the right. Isaac Liu at lock forward. On the interchange, Cruz Leeming, Aaron Clark, Cleese Haas, and Joe Vuna. Extend the roster, Keanu Keeney, who is the player that would come to fullback with Campbell going to the halves if Foran isn't good to go. And then extended roster also features Aaron Shop, who is just out of favour at the Gold Coast. Tom Weaver, Thomas McCowie, who they picked up from the ESL, coming back to Australia. And then Sam McIntyre. For the Eels 60s, a couple of changes for us as well. Fullback Clinton Gufferson, Micah Sevo, and Hayes Dunster on the flanks. Will Penasini and Bailey Simonson in the centres. Bailey coming back into the team after that mandatory 1 week stand down for a concussion, a Cat 1 concussion. Pushes Sean Russell out of the roster. We've already talked about him playing New South Wales Cup. In the halves, unchanged, Brown and Moses. Front row, Greg Hodgson Barlaw, unchanged from last game as well. In the back row, though, we do have a change. Sean Lane on the left. Andrew Davey gets an expedited return to the starting team. He'll be on the right after playing Reggie's last week. He pushes Bryce Cartwright back to the interchange. Jermaine Hopgood will play from lock forward. Now the bench looks a little bit more beefed up, actually. Bryce Cartwright, Brendan Hands, Ryan Madison, Mac Hesse Makatoa. So it looks like Davey and Cartwright operating as a battery on the right edge. Freeing up, Ryan Madison to focus on reinforcing the middle. With the extended roster, Jake Arthur, Sean Russell, Offa Hickey Ogden, Matt Dory, and Jack Murchie. Chris Butler's got the whistle. Ben Cummings is in the box. And then, it's all the main details in terms of this particular clash, mate.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, are they going to take a fresh reserve up there, or are they going to rely on someone that plays on Saturday
and then gets
flying up there Sunday morning to be the fresh reserve, the concussion sub? I would imagine that would fall to Jake Arthur to be the concussion sub, but you'd have to also think that they would fly up someone else as well to be you
probably have an 18th and 19th.
Yeah. You don't want to be interstate with limited options if someone has an issue in warm-ups or something happens before the game and you just don't have time to get anyone up there. So, mate, as you were going through the Gold Coast team, I was thinking strike player. So.
Yeah, you can see why they can explode out in the first half to big leads, and also why they can fade out in the second half, because if one of those or any number of those strike players gets hot, they can really cause an offensive torrent of points. But on the flip side, when things get a little bit tougher and tighter, they just don't have the consistency for the roster to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder. Yeah.
So can you run through their bench for us again?
So you got Leeming, Clark, Haas, and Vuna. All young players, I'm pretty certain. Aaron Clark, of course. One time he was in our system, but never got a chance to actually play for us. We recruited him as a young lad, and he ended up staying in New Zealand, and then made his way to the Gold Coast Titans, obviously. Not.
So they've actually got two players who are effectively dummy halves I like Aaron Clark's now
And
a
Leeming.
bit more of a utility.
Yeah. He plays a bit of
player.
lock forward as well now,
Yeah.
with that, that sort of trend towards ball playing lock forwards. But yeah, Leeming and Clark give him that extended coverage at dummy half. And then you've got Cleese Haas, who is a young back rower, who I believe is related to Payne Haas, if I'm not mistaken.
Is he his younger brother?
Brother or cousin? I'm not sure. Nephew of Mark Tafua. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, so he's a 21-year-old back rower, and then you got Joe Vuna rounding out the interchange, and he's a 24-year-old. What does he play? Second row as well, yeah. So yeah, it's certainly not the highest profile interchange roster, but you contrast that against Campbell, who's obviously an exciting young fullback. Cam Pereira is a very impressive young prospect that's got a nose for the try line. Philip Sami's in great touch 60s. He's wreaking all sorts of havoc out there on the edges. And then in the forwards, Fodawaka, Fa'a, Suama Ali, and Fafita, a fearsome triumvirate of forwards. And guys like sort of Stimson and Lou, I suppose, provide more of the consistency. But yeah, like I said, you can see why the Gold Coast are capable of these, explosions of point scoring. The question will be... Sorry, you say?
Sorry, sorry, continue.
I was saying the question will be how much can the Eels inhibit that, opening flurry and then, get into their own groove and put on their own amount of pressure.
Well, I'll get onto that in a moment, but we haven't touched on the fact that Leeming from the Gold Coast would be the only player, probably in the history of the NRL, to come from the kingdom of Eswatini, which was formerly Swaziland. So that's where he was born. So he's of African heritage, and of course went to the ended up playing rugby league in the Super League.
Yeah.
And now is in the NRL. But talk about the multiculturalism of the NRL coming to the fore there. Someone from Eswatini, it's quite remarkable. So, and he's 27 years of age too. So he's not what you'd call a youngster. He's had a long time in the Super League over there, and he's decided to chance his hand over here in the NRL. It's almost, I guess, in one sense, it's almost akin to those late debuts you see from the likes of Andy Davey, who debuted at like 27, 28, whatever the age was by the time he finally got his NRL debut with the Eels. So, and there's been a couple of others in more recent times that have debuted later in life. It's and as I said, although he was playing top grade rugby league over in the UK, just to see someone chance their hand like Andrew Davey did with coming down from Queensland and having that long history of football in the Queensland Cup, chancing his hand in the NRL, because you got to completely uproot your life that you have. And so someone at 27 uprooting a life over in England,
going across the world,
absolutely no guarantee of playing first grade. No guarantee of playing first grade. Not when you've got players ahead of you that have played in that dummy half position, and he's still coming off the bench, and he's coming off the bench when they had the likes, as we said, of Aaron Clark, who would have been ahead of him in terms of local experience coming off and playing at dummy half, as well as Tanner Boyd, who has now switched to the halves, but he would have been as well a dummy half option for the Gold Coast Titans. So he's certainly, theoretically, the great unknown as to whether he was going to get any NRL time whatsoever. So, yeah, interesting sidelight there. So, mate, as to what sort of threat the Gold Coast posed to the Eels, I think we've won something like the last 7 or 8.
Yeah, and it's
row.
actually. So I think we won the last 7 in a row, and it's actually tipped our historic win rate against the Titans in Parramatta's favour, 12 wins to their 11, which is kind of hard to believe that we'd had that many struggles against them. But when you think back to those early days, I think they had a lot of scrappy wins against us, and they, they managed to get out to So we had 3 losses in a row at the start, and then we famously beat them in that 09 final. Then we had another string of 3 losses from 2012 to 2013, which is no shock given how bad we were.
I was going to say that wasn't a surprise in any way, shape, or form across those years.
BA takes over in 2014. We get a win, then a couple of really tight losses, a win, a couple of losses, and then a whole string of W's, 7 of them. So that tips the historical win data in Parramatta's favour. And then the other thing I suppose to consider is Magic Round as a whole. How's it treated the Parramatta Eels? And in inception, we don't really talk about it, but that was the year that the Melbourne Storm put 64 on us. And then in 2020, there was no Magic Round because of the COVID bubble. And then 21, the Eels, which was Jake Arthur's debut game, if I'm not mistaken, 60s.
Against the Warriors.
Against the Warriors, 34-18. And then last year we lost in a thriller against the Roosters, 31-24. That was actually a pretty, as far as losses go, a fairly entertaining game. And then that brings us to this year against the Titans. So on historic form, loss, win, loss, we're due for a W. But yeah, the Titans are a very difficult team to evaluate this year. They've been guilty of big-time second-half fades. We saw last week against Manly, they were able to make an attitude adjustment when it looked like that the dominoes were going to fall against them once again. They sucked it up, sucked it in, and managed to get the win. But the week before was the Dolphins game, and that one was a brutal collapse in the second half.
I think what I'm guarded against is the Eels playing anything that resembles touch football against the Titans.
Which is what we were guilty of round 1 last year.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got into a shootout.
We were heading towards like a 40-36 loss, the way that it was going in that first half, because we started out like the proverbial house on fire, but then we started to open up. Our defence started to open up as well, and it seemed like we were going try for try. And what was it, a 6-point margin at halftime from memories, or was it closer? But I just remember sitting there thinking, this is not what I want to see today. I don't want to see the Eels playing that type of touch football that was on display. And at the time, that was when Jake Arthur was on the bench, and I think he had to come on in the halves. And was Dylan Brown moved out to centre?
Yeah, Sean Russell got the rib injury.
Yeah, that's right. So we had the reshuffle in the second half, and then it was a really tight second half. I think there was 6 points scored or something like that we might have scored. But anyway, it was
22, I believe, at halftime, and then the Gold Coast struck in the 41st minute and converted to make it 28 all. Was it 28? No, it would have been 26-22. And then the Eels kicked the trio of penalty goals.
That's it. Yeah. So I knew that there was the penalty goals, the 6 points there, but it was, to be honest, I was happy when Jake Arthur came on and they just played it tight. Like he kept working the play back towards the middle. And I thought, I was glad that we got into the grind with the play against the Titans. And so I'm wondering, again, that Parramatta football that we prefer, which is just drive through the middle, win that part of the field first, lay the platform, and we're going to, I'm trotting out rugby league cliches here, but it's
they're
just
cliches for a reason.
Yes,
it's always fun to make fun of rugby league idioms, cliches, all those sort of things. But the reason why you talk about building a platform, going set for set, getting into the grind, is because these are things that tend to trend towards victory in a given contest.
Yeah, and especially with the team structure that the Eels have, which is that when we generate the space through the forwards, getting the defence marching backwards, that's when the likes of Moses and Dylan Brown and Clint Gutherson are at their best, because they get that get that extra room to do something, and they have the middle of the ruck backpedaling, and they can Moses can unleash one of those runs just on the edge of the ruck where his acceleration comes to the fore, because he loves that tired defence.
Yes.
He might just, sometimes he might drift a little bit and then accelerate. Other times he just takes off like beside the ruck, and next thing he's through on the other side. And once Moses is through on the other side, well, he's got the pace to cause all sorts of problems for the fullback, run around the fullback, or just pin his ears back and go for the corner and challenge the fullback to be able to get anywhere near him. But we need that middle to be won. And we saw last week that the Newcastle defensive line became quite passive. They were standing on their heels and waiting for the Eels to come to them. Now, it's a fair call that maybe the Knights were ready for their holiday. I mean, that's one of the more remarkable things that's come out this week, is Knights players being on holiday in Bali. And you think, hey, if they've planned to be going away to places like that, little wonder that football was maybe not at the forefront of their headspace coming into the game against the Eels. It's like the average worker who's
checked out on the Thursday or Friday before their trip to somewhere.
Yeah. So look, as I said, it's fair call to say that the Eels were playing against a very passive line, but my goodness, the likes of Ogden and Makatoa, especially when they came on, they were coming off the back fence. There's another cliche for you, but they were. The mobility and the power in their runs, they were getting that first 10 metres almost unchallenged for a start. So they had a head of steam by the time that first defender was coming to them. In contrast, Wiramu Greg, that leg drive, once he hit contact, was I was quite surprised that his post-contact meters weren't higher than what they were at the end of the game. But it seems like the more game time that he's getting, the better. So he's obviously not up in Reg's class of player just at the moment. But if they can get that job done through the middle, then I think looking at the Gold Coast have that those flashy sort of players that look like they're capable of doing anything, their back line. But we know that defensively, when they fall out of the zone, they fall out in a big way. And I think if we get the basics done well, then we let the points take care of themselves after that. And I don't think we can. I don't think we can be thinking about last week's scoreline in any way. I don't think the players can afford to be thinking about the Gold Coast's collapse the previous week. They just have to be treating them with respect right from the start and go about playing Parramatta footy the best way that they can.
It's an interesting game in the macro scope of the season too, because getting a beat on Parramatta's form has been difficult. We've had obviously the good win against Penrith, which is really the flagship win of the season so far, but a difficult loss against the Roosters, in which we had a couple of sin bins that meant that it was never really a contest. A very lethargic win over the West Tigers, a good but unpolished win against the Bulldogs, followed up by a rough 5-day turnaround to Darwin, where we played an awful opening 40 minutes and then still somehow nearly made a run at them, where we should have had that two-man advantage at one point, which was then backed up into what was essentially a training run against Newcastle. The Eels' draw has been so bizarre in terms of versing opponents in inopportune times, good teams coming off buys, or 5-day turnarounds in the case of the Brisbane Broncos. So it's been very difficult to get a real beat on how the Eels are travelling. This might be the first game where there's some normalcy, I suppose, about approaching their opponents and be able to, get a finger on the pulse of how they're travelling. And even then, it's the last game of Magic Rounds. We've got the turf concerns, but I'm putting them to the side for the moment. There's been a 7-day turnaround, or plus 7-day turnaround for the Eels against from the Newcastle game to this one, so they've got a chance to be fit and rested. And I hope that gets them in the right space mentally and physically to get Parramatta football well and truly underway this season.
One of the interesting things with this year compared to last year is last year we kept enough wins rolling along that we started out in the top 8 and we continued along, and eventually, of course, were able to work our way into the top 4. But there was fluctuating form last year. It was wildly fluctuating, almost like the Reggies this year, where we had games where it was fair to say that the performances were phoned in. Against the Broncos that Thursday night at Combank Stadium,
South Sydney.
The obligatory failure.
And we're about to find out about South Sydney a couple of weeks down the road about how the Eels are going to match up against one of the powerhouses this year. And that's a problem for them. But
but there was just that game against the West Tigers. We'll gave them, I think, their first win of the year last year. The game against the Bulldogs.
We got towed up, round 8, round 9 last year.
Yeah, what was it, 32-0 or something like that? Yeah,
something like that. So while we've had more losses relative to the run this time last year, we've done a much better job of keeping those losses within competitive ranges, and that's a big part of why.
I think it has to do with what we've had has been maybe it's not so much a wildly fluctuating form, but the execution has been something that's varied greatly this year. The effort, we've had some halves of football which haven't been great. Like that first half against the Broncos up in Darwin was a very, very ordinary effort. But then they lifted in the second half, and whilst they weren't able to get the job done, it was difficult to question the effort. Last year, there were times where you just had to question the effort. You just had to say, what is going on here? Why haven't they? And again, the cliche, they didn't turn up. There were games last year where they didn't turn up. I don't think I could accuse the Eels of not turning up in a game. I think I could accuse them of having poor execution in some matches. I think I could accuse them of having poor halves in matches, but I'm not sure that I could accuse them of not turning up in a game this year. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like we said, there's stretches of play, passages of play where they've been poor, but on the whole, when you look at that each game in its totality and entirety, you're looking back, they've definitely been much more competitive. And like I said, that is probably the single biggest indicator of why they're for and against. Their points differential stands so healthily after 9 rounds. It's actually in like the top 5 of the current NRL and not that far off the best in the game. So the fact that they've been far more competitive on a week-to-week basis, even with, some bad games like the Darwin game, up against some teams off, buys and bad turnarounds, they've done a good job mitigating damage in the losses they've had. So, it's not something to be proud of per se, because you obviously want to be winning instead of losing, but it is a good sign of temperament that the team has been much more competitive.
The other thing that's been interesting too is I think that where we've had issues defensively has been more around the ruck than out wide this year. It's been well documented that Josh Hodgson has had issues with his defence, but by the same token, so has Jermaine Hopgood. So you're talking about 2 players in the middle that have missed more tackles than ideally than what they'd like. And then there was that terrific article was at the Rugby League Eye Test that talked about how teams were in matches where the Eels didn't perform well, that the teams had worked over the Eels' middle and made them work a lot more than they normally do, and that then opened up opportunities through the ruck. And I was thinking last week and watching the Knights attempting to break the Eels' line, and you had a number of missed tackles, like Sean Russell, I think was 7 or 8 missed tackles, something like that. But the way that the Eels slid and scrambled said a lot about the defensive resolve that was out there and the systems that they've got working. I think it's fair to say we're now operating on that slide system, the compressed defence but sliding, whereas last year it seemed more that there was a jam that was happening and teams were getting around the outside.
And they made that transition later in the season to a slide defense.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I remember last year when there was a lot of criticism for the Eels' defence, and they weren't doing anything to fix it. And I said, no, they are. Like I'm watching them at training now, working on a slide defence, and there were just instances where the team or the players might fall out of their system, and it took a little while for them to become comfortable in that slide defence. But I watched them really working on that, and I think it's quite effective at the moment. Mind you, when you've got a player of Dylan Brown's defensive qualities that's defending out wide, he cleaned up a lot last week, didn't he?
Oh, Dill was just relentless in that regard, and it's not to be slept on, but Mitch uses his speed very well to provide massive cover support for his outside men on the right edge too.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point that you make about Mitch Moses, because he is a really brave defender. The number of big men that they run at Mitch Moses, and he makes I should really dig into the stat on this, but he seems to make a lot of one-on-one tackles. And even where he ends up credited with a miss, he's done the job of taking the momentum out of the run. And there's as far as his defensive work is concerned, he was maligned as a player for his defence before he came to the Eels. And I have all the confidence in the world in Mitch Moses. If you compare him to the way some other halfbacks in the NRL defend, and dare I say it, if we think back to the days where Chris Sandow was
night and day difference.
Yeah, it's you. I've got all the confidence in the world, even if, as I said, even if there's tackles where Mitch will miss it, I know that he's gone into that tackle giving everything that he's absolutely got, and there's a good chance that even if he ends up credited with a miss, that he's effectively shut down what was coming his way. So, and as you said, a big part of that has to do with his speed, where he's able to get across quickly and cover those sorts of shifts, like you see the South Sydney sort of shift of the ball. But, then again, you said that big test is going to come against South Sydney.
A couple of weeks down the road.
So maybe I shouldn't speak too early. So, mate, so I guess getting back to this game specifically, Reg is obviously a big out. How many minutes that we get out of Woody? He seems to be getting extra minutes every week.
Yeah, the Brad Alpha is clearly trusting him with more and more of a workload, especially in the absence of Reg. But now we have Ryan Madison looking to be deployed in a specialist middle role, so that also changes the equation this week.
Yeah, and I think it's not lost that Andrew Davey has come in. You said that expedited return. He's come in pretty quickly into the starting lineup for the Eels, and BA's obviously looking for his defensive qualities against the Gold Coast's pack.
Well, he matches up against David Fafita. if I'm not mistaken. So that's he and Will Penasini will have their hands full trying to contain I say contain. When he's on, you have to contain him, but he can be a bit mercurial in that regard. But Fafita is absolutely a game wrecker when he's switched on, so they're going to have their hands full.
Yeah, let's hope he's having one of his quieter games. Yeah. And look, I guess what the defence does with him early on can really determine what sort of game he has. Like if you can shut him down,
don't give him that.
Get him quieter,
sliver of confidence.
Maybe, take away the confidence. The thing is, he's going to be coming into this game with a lot of confidence because his form of recent has been very, very strong, and he's back to that wrecking ball type of play, and we just can't afford for him to get any sort of momentum because, I mean, it's not just the power in his runs. He's got genuine pace for such a big bloke.
He can open up and hit the gas, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, you wouldn't want to see him have an opening and be hitting full pace. You wouldn't want to be Clint Gutherson facing him. We know Gutho is one of the best defensive fullbacks, but I'd challenge any fullback to be able to produce effective one-on-one tackles on Fafita, and we know that they've got some good finishers, the Gold Coast Titans. Like if they get a line break,
Khan Pereira, obviously leads the way. He's been bagging doubles consistently in that regard, but Sami, Campbell, they're all guys that can convert half an opportunity into 4 points.
Now, I got you to run through the Titans interchange bench before. How do you reckon the Eels bench stacks up against them, mate?
I mean, on paper, I want to say it's at least a TKO for the Eels there. Cartwright's in tremendous form. Madison is a rep caliber player. Brendan Hands has been a really nice revelation this year. And it's, growing game to game. And Macca, well, the question for Macca is, can he back up these performances? We've seen him before earlier this season. He had a very good game against Manly, then faded against the Roosters. This week, he needs to back up a big game against Newcastle and really turn a corner there.
Do you think if you were a Titans supporter, that you would look at the bench and go, I think we've got the edge there. We had Cardi here with us.
Based on their prior experiences of Bryce, absolutely, they'd be tainted by, understandably so, by a stint of play from Bryce there where he was just reckless and played fast and loose. And the Cartwright that we're seeing this year is different from the Cartwright we even saw for Parramatta in years prior. And he is, I don't know what's happened, whether someone had the come to Jesus talk with him in terms of football, or he just did the adjustment himself. But the brand of football he is playing this year is outstanding, and it makes him a completely different player. And we're starting to see the offloads coming in a good way, not in a reckless capacity. He is, because he's running so hard and putting in so much effort. When the offloads do come, they're high quality, and they're really setting up plus gains in behind the ruck.
Yeah. So, where's the game won for you?
I think you got to minimise the likes of Fodawaker and Big Tino in the middle, and the Eels really need to get a foothold in the ruck, and just so much of this game will flow from there. The Titans are still capable of scoring points from either long range or on the back of Parramatta areas if they present themselves. But if you can get the arm wrestle going in your favour, then you got Moses on the front foot, Dill on the front foot. That left edge is starting to coalesce now. We saw against Newcastle one of those pet plays Eels love to use where Sean Lane gets in the 5/8, and you have Dylan sweeping as a fullback and how effective that can be. So the left is starting to get a few different shapes and structures in place now at Lane's back up the match speed. And on the right, well, Moses just, he really dictates the flow down that edge, whether he's giving early ball to Penasini or putting the foot down himself. So I think if Greg and Barlow and Hodgson and Hopgood all do their job in the opening exchanges, and we can, get out to an early try or two lead, we'll be in a very strong position, because the Gold Coast is going to come out hard and fast and looking for a big opening flurry, and the Eels need to mitigate that. And if you can travel through that first 20-minute period, right through to halfway, I suppose, and have some sort of ascendancy on the scoreboard and in the flow of the game, I think in the second half you can run away with it.
How critical do you think the performance of Josh Hodgson is going to be in this game?
He's been very critical of himself, using that word again there, in the media this week, saying he's been down on his expected form, and thankful for Brad Arthur for showing some support in him. And we know with BA that is a real calling card of his coaching style, isn't it? He will back his players to the hilt, giving them every opportunity to claw their way out of a slump or anything similar. And in this case, Hodgson has been slumping. You mentioned defensively he's missing tackles. Part of the reason he's missing tackles is he's been looking for very, very strong first-up contact, and maybe he needs to transition to not a passive defensive style, but maybe working more efficiently in terms of his points of contact, right? Not trying to aim up for head-to-head and smash someone, but help wrap up with the other big boys in the middle. I thought something
technically is going wrong there, because he's being bumped off. Josh Hodgson actually is not a small dummy half. He's quite a solid unit. We've seen the photos of him from the pre-season, which showed that he's different. He's a different build to Reed Marnie. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And look, Reed has his defensive issues. He's probably right up there in terms of missed tackles. With whilst there's been criticism of Hodgson, Marnie's probably at least up there as well in the number of missed tackles. But as you say, he looks like he's going for the bigger contact, and he's getting bumped off. And that can happen when you've got a bigger body against you. I said he's not a small body, but he's not as big as the props and the second rowers that are running at him, and he's getting bumped off. And then there's other times where he just looks like he's gassed, and he seems slightly out of position.
And in that regard, I think BA can probably be a little bit more aggressive about rotating his dummy halves. Getting hands in maybe a set or two earlier when he thinks he needs to get him in, to keep Hodgson fresher, both in terms of those initial defensive lapses and then just get him fresher for a second stint on the field. I fought against Newcastle, and again, it's hard to pass how effective it will be for his confidence, given that Newcastle were not there mentally. But he was more effective in offense in that first stint. He was distributing the ball pretty cleanly and had a couple of early try assists that, again, the defense was pretty soft. But
I agree. I thought his first stint against Newcastle was arguably his most consistent, his best form for the year out there. His second stint, he pulled the trigger on a couple of kicks.
And that's where I was going. I think offensively, the best thing he can do is just put the kick away. At least if it's a called shot and it's the kick from dummy half where there is a calibrated chaser, I'm okay with that. But there was one against Newcastle where there was some offloads and some second phase play that sort of had the Eels meandering around in front of the uprights, and I think he was on tackle 3, and he decided he was just going to kick ahead, and those ones just can go away.
That looked like the play of an inexperienced footballer.
Yeah.
That at that moment it was almost, I won't say it was a panic play, but it was almost like, oh, what am I going to do here?
I'll kick it.
I'll kick it. Yeah, not okay. Let's settle the play down, which you'd expect from a senior player. Let's settle the play down. Let's take the tackle, and let's recalibrate where we're at. We're in complete control in this match. We don't need to do anything flashy here. But I think I've maintained that his confidence has been down. That he's feeling that he's been. As harsh as the critics have been against him, I think he's probably the sort of player who'd be his own harshest critic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been the more that the season's gone on, the more that's plagued his mind. And I think the players are getting around him in a big way. And he just needs a couple of stints like he had at the start of the game against Newcastle, just to to give him that confidence back. And with a bit of confidence, there's no way he's doing those sorts of plays that he did at the end of the game last week. But do you think the Gold Coast are likely to try to work him over?
Oh, it's going to cut both ways because the Gold Coast are definitely going to target him defensively with those big units, Mo and Tino, and maybe even get David Fafita coming back into the ruck trying to pick him out. But on the flip side, the flimsiness of the Gold Coast defense could open up opportunities for Josh. So going to be interesting to see which of those two strategies ends up triumphing the most.
Okay. Now, the return of Bailey Simonson. Are we going to see better run meters from our back five with his inclusion?
Maybe. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. I think Bailey's going to be more productive rucking the ball out than Sean Russell, but he's certainly not going to be boosting Mike Acevo or Hayes Dunster's numbers for the varying reasons there. You know, Acevo's just not a big workhorse when it comes to rucking it out. He's been better, but he's not, unfortunately that's not his game. And Dunster has been working hard, but there's just an absolute ceiling on his ability to perform right now with that knee that he's trying to rehabilitate from. So I think Bailey comes in and helps, but right now I still think that the biggest contributors there will be Guffo and Penasini.
Yeah, I agree. And I wish I could find the key to what Sevo needs to be more effective from the backfield, or certainly as effective in the backfield as he is when he's in the opponent's red zone. But it's just never seemed to have been unlocked. And I think it really just comes down to that the fitness levels. And people might think, well, what can the Eels do to? Surely they can make him a little bit fitter. I think there's as much of a psychological issue in terms of that as anything else with Sevo. He's a power athlete, and I've never really seen too much of him being able to get those meters from the backfield. In fact, the biggest shock was that break that he made last week.
That was more indicative of Newcastle's headspace than anything else, I feel like. Big Dom Young just gave up. He just didn't want anything to do with that. And, yeah, I mean, it was followed up by an absolute shocker of a pass too.
Yeah. Can I tell you, I watched training this week and Micah was working on that pass. So that left to right pass, he was working on it. They had him. I'm trying to think who he was working with. It might have even been. I'm just trying to think who he was working with now. But anyway, he spent quite a deal of time at training, getting that left to right pass happening. So no stone unturned there to rectify that. Okay, let's get into the tips, mate.
Yep. This has the propensity to be another big win for the Parramatta Eels. The Titans, they're front runners, but they fade massively. And obviously they've been working hard on that, trying to rectify those second half issues. And we saw against Manly, they were able to stymie the bleeding in what was potentially another big comeback and then turn it into a solid win. But the Eels also the ability to pile on points. So I am going to tip a big Parramatta Eels win. I'm not sure of what sort of scoreline. So maybe 35-8 or 10.
Are you going for the disrespectful field goal again?
There will be a field goal at some point, yes.
Okay. I'm tipping a 38-18 scoreline. I think that the Titans have the sort of attack where they are going to score points, and that the Eels will obviously score more, but I think they're going to pose more of a threat with their attack than what the Knights did last week. So at the very least, they get one more try than the Knights. Wouldn't surprise me if they got up as high as 24 points, but I think we got close to 40 in us. Turning to first try scorer, mate.
I'm going to the hot hand, one of the best players in the team, right centre, Will Penasini.
Okay, now I came through with the first try scorer last week.
It's true.
With Dylan Brown. So where will I go this week? Look, I'm going to go with. Here's a quick clue to my selection. Choo choo, the Lane Train,
Lane
mate.
Train, yeah. I like it.
So,
I like it.
I just think we just started to see some glimpses last week of that combination with Dylan Brown, and I think he's got a try in him this week. So I think he is going to score a try at some point, but I'll go for him for the first try.
All right.
And best on field.
Best on field. I feel like saying Mitchell Moses is a bit of a cheat. So, because, these are the sort of games where he's going to likely thrive. So I'll go for like a 1A, 1B situation here. Jeez. This also feels like a game where Jermaine Hopgood might be able to pop off. If the Titans get a little bit loose around the ruck, open up his ability to ball play before and through the line, maybe he'll be one of the better players in the game.
Okay. Well, it's funny because I had my first instinct was Mitch Moses for best on field, and then I thought, like you, that may well be a call that's too easy to make. And then my next thought was the King, and then I thought, hang on, if I've just steered away from Moses as being a bit too easy to call as the winner, then I shouldn't go with Gutho because he's if anything even more obvious. So I'm gonna stick with my first try scorer and say Sean Lane.
Back lane into the big double, FTS and MVP.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
And for our little bonus this week, Sixties and myself were out at the Blue and Gold Alliance Golf Day, which is now known as the Ted Sulkowicz Memorial Golf Day, where we're able to enjoy some wonderful stories shared by the former players and former greats of the club following a rather tricky day on the greens. Tim Gilbert did a wonderful job emceeing this event, while Bill Richards and everyone behind the scenes that organised it did a tremendous, tremendous job pulling it all together. So here are some excerpts from our chats with Tim Gilbert and some of the other players there on their takes from the day, as well as their predictions for the game on Sunday.
Tim, great to have you hosting being the MC for today's BGA event. And for us, it's a real honour because we're the Cumberland Throw. You were the one that walked around with the raffle board at the old Cumberland Oval.
Absolutely.
So did you enjoy yourself today?
I had a great day, and as we all get older, I think we all get more nostalgic. And of course, today's the Ted Sulkowicz Memorial Golf Day. And as a boy, one of 6 growing up in Guildford, we were always at Cumberland Oval to watch Ted and Ed and all those other mighty players of the late 70s, early 80s. So, no, it was a real honour to be here today.
Look, of course, it is a blue and gold themed day. We've got the big match between the Eels and the Titans this weekend, so we're going to grab your tips for this weekend. What have you got as the winning score?
I think Parramatta might just do a job on the Titans. I'll say 32 points to 10, and I think that in the form that he was in after scoring a hat-trick last week and nearly 4 or 5 tries, he was really commanding. I think Clint Gutherson will be the player of the match.
And first try scorer?
First try scorer, let's say Gutho.
Mate, it's been an honour. Nice to meet you.
You too.
And thanks for hosting
Go
today.
the Cumberland Throw.
Okay, we're here with the great Eric Gross Senior, Guru. Mate, how'd you enjoy the day?
It was fantastic, mate. The weather was great. Everything was beautiful except for my game. My game was ordinary. I'm lucky I had a couple of good players in my team. So,
mate, we've heard some great stories. I'm not sure what was the best. The married name for Brains' potential wife, or the story about the stray dog. But we'll have to leave that for people to guess. Yeah. But it was certainly a great day. The Blue and Gold Alliance, mate, what can you say about that as an organisation?
It's really come together, hasn't it? And guys like Teddy Sulkowicz, when he was organising it, just brought it up bigger than what it has been. So it's been fantastic. And these days are great to get everyone together. And then towards the end of the year, in a couple of months, I think there's the normal reunion. And they're saying it's a weekend thing, so how good's that?
And how's the gigging going at the moment?
A bit quiet last month, but this month we've got some things happening. We're going to gig this Saturday night at Campbelltown Catholic Club, and it's good.
Well, for anyone that's listening right now, I went and saw Eric Groth and the Gurus at it was Toongabbie Bowling Club.
Right.
Yep. And it was, mate, the set list that you have. It's party central with that set list, so that's just on the night I saw you. I'm sure it
it's
mixes
pretty much
up.
the same all the way through, mate. So
but we got to get your tips for the big match between the Titans and the Eels on Sunday. So you got a winner and a rough scoreline for us.
Oh, shit. Well, Parramatta will win, obviously, but the Titans are a much different team this year, so it'll be a tougher game. The score will be, I think, 24 points to 12.
Okay. What about a first try scorer?
Jeez.
We ask the tough questions here, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Mitchell Moses.
Okay. Best on field?
Mitchell Moses.
There we go. Thanks, mate.
No worries, my pleasure.
We're with the Blue and Gold Alliance president, Billy Richards. Bill, another fantastic day for the Blue and Gold Alliance.
Certainly, Craig. It was a wonderful day. Great to see so many former players here today who have really embraced this day for Teddy and are passionate about their golf and getting together and celebrating and reconnecting with each other that they did last year. So it was fantastic.
I was just saying to Guru that my highlight, certainly some of those stories, especially the stray dog story that Muggo told. That was a beauty.
That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. And it just shows you that in those days the selection process was sometimes somewhat awkward. To say the least.
So the next big event for the Blue and Gold Alliance is?
The next big event for the Blue and Gold Alliance is our reunion and our Old Boys Day, which is reunion's on the 5th of August and the Old Boys Day on the 6th of August. So we're doing it over a weekend.
And that's for the Dragons game at Combank Stadium, is that right?
That's correct, yes, the Dragons game.
So supporters should look out for the Blue and Gold Alliance doing the lap of honour around the stadium on that day, give you a big cheer.
Yeah, and also form the guard of honour for the first grade when they run out in the field, which we did last year for the first time in a long while, so with a big group.
Fantastic, mate. Now we've got to get your tips for the weekend. Parramatta against the Titans. Have you got the winner and a rough scoreline for us?
No doubt the Eels. I reckon probably 24 to 12.
And man of the match?
Mitch Moses.
First try scorer?
Sevo.
Mate, really enjoyed today. We always love being involved with the BGA, and thanks again for putting on today.
Fantastic to have you again, Craig and John.
We're here with Eels legend Jeff Gerard. Jeff, another great day for the BGA. Did you enjoy the day?
Awesome day. It's always good to catch up to both supporters and players you played with. And we played a great course here at Cabra. They always put on a good show. So, really excited for this to come around every year. And, we should be encouraging more and more players to get along to it.
Do you have a personal highlight of today?
There wasn't too many highlights, I can assure you.
Well, maybe not on the golf course, but what about the chats that were going on?
Well, it's like, I was just talking to Nobby Clark, and I see Nobby once a year here. Yeah. It is an opportunity for you to actually come up to people that you can't see. And obviously during COVID, no reunions going on, it's been a bit of a drought with catching up to people. So, we just got to encourage more and more ex-players, as well as supporters and sponsors, to get along to this thing, because great golf course and great day. Yeah,
and we've got the reunion, the official reunion comes up for the St George game.
Yeah. Yes, St George. Yeah, not my favourite team.
And we've got to get you. We can't let you go without getting your tips for the big match on Sunday. Eels against the Titans. Your winner and a rough scoreline.
Look, I mean, the way our guys are going, they're gonna win that, and I still think they're going to win by about 15 or 16 points. They've turned the corner in my view, and whilst the Titans will put up a good show, I don't think they'll be in our class. And
what about best on field for the Eels?
Probably for me, Madison. I like him as a player. Just, he's a no-nonsense. He's straight up. There's no crap in him. He'd be my best on ground.
And first try scorer?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm going to go our big prop forward.
Junior
Paulo.
Yeah, why not? Well,
he grew up not far from here,
Yeah. And he did get over last match, wasn't it? The offload, yeah, under the post. Yeah, why not? 2 weeks in a row.
I'm always going to pick a front rower. Come on. We don't want those wingers.
Thanks, Jeff.
No, my
Good to
pleasure.
catch up with you.
Good to see you.
Okay, we're with one of my favourite players from back in the 70s. It's almost a fanboy moment every time I'm talking to this bloke. I absolutely bent his ear one day at the pub when we had the chance. Ed Sulkowicz, try scorer in the 1977 grand final. That's right. We just needed the Crow to put the goal over. And
if a ball goes between two sticks, it premiers. If it doesn't go between sticks, it has been.
Yeah. Mate.
But the one I consider that we should have won was the year before in '76.
Yes.
Against Manly.
Yes.
Neville's gone, but if he doesn't drop the ball there, we win the game. And we were the better team, and still to this very day, a team that scored more tries in the grand final and has lost it.
Yeah, and lost by 3 points despite scoring more tries. I was up on the hill that day, but you know what? It was and I know it's no consolation for the players, but it was such a great year. It was such it was the beginning of change for our club. It really was. And it was spoken about today that it was a sliding door moment as well, because if we had won in those 2 years, the question is, would the club have recruited Jack Gibson as a coach?
Well, I look at it this way also too. If we won 76, 77, and Eric said he's a pubic hair in, right? If we win 76, 77, who knows? We could have won 78, maybe, 79, and then these blokes, we could have had a run.
And I often wonder if Terry Fernley would have been the coach all the way through then, through into the 80s.
Yeah.
But a day like today, it's a big day for the Sulkowicz family. The day's in honour of your brother Ted. Is it special? Is it emotional? What's your takes on it?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's so special because Ted was on the committee with
Bill
Richards.
Yeah.
He was on the committee with him, and they were organising just a golf day for the Parramatta boys.
Yeah.
As it turned out, he's ended up organising his own testimonial golf day.
Yeah.
Because it was called off for a month because of wet weather, and then he died, and then they had this. So it come to Ted Sulkowicz testimonial.
And what's your highlight of the day, a day like today?
Oh, it's being captain and putting shit on all the players.
Yeah.
I love the banter. I love the arguments. And they all want to walk off.
Well, we heard some stories today that we hadn't heard before. Muggo tells a great story, that's for certain. Now, we can't let you go without getting your tips on this weekend's game between the Eels and the Titans. What we're after, first of all, is your winner and a rough score for the match.
Well, personally, Redcliffe had proven me wrong. I just didn't think they'd win a game until 8, 9, 10 games. But they're up there. But I think Parramatta are on the way up.
Yep.
And I think the score will be 20-14.
Okay, and first try scorer?
Well, for Parramatta, Pinseedy.
Okay, and what about your best on field? Who's going to be the best player for the Eels out there?
Out there, I think, I forgot his name, the 5'8" now.
Dylan Brown. Yeah, he's a beauty.
Yeah.
Mate, thank you so much. It's always great to be able to say good day to you.
Thank you. And I'm glad you come over.
Hopefully you enjoyed those sounds and insights from the Ted Sulkowicz Memorial Golf Day. Thank you to everyone involved for taking the time to chat to myself and Craig. Let's get back to the regular podcast. And of course, there are still the 7 other games in Magic Round for us to blitz through with our Tip 60s. Round kicks off with a 6 o'clock p.m. start with the Bulldogs in 13th place taking on the Canberra Raiders in 11th. The Raiders having that last gasp but controversial win over the Dolphins. Canterbury finding some traction against the St. George Illawarra Dragons with the debut of Carl Owapu. How do you see this one, big fella?
I think it's a win to the Raiders. I think the Bulldogs have a recent atrocious record either in Queensland or against the Raiders. I'm not sure exactly whether it's one or the other or both, but I thought that game against the Dragons last week, whilst entertaining,
it wasn't high quality, no.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I was waiting for whoever's going to stuff up in some way, and wouldn't you know, it was the Dragons that managed to find more stuff ups than the Bulldogs. So I'm going with the Raiders.
I'll go
and I
Raiders
think
too.
Comfortably.
Mm-hmm. Main event Friday night is this is a bit of a slap in the face of Manly taking a home game to Suncorp to take on the Broncos. God, that's terrible scheduling. Manly did take this game to Brisbane before Magic Round, actually, didn't they? They played, so this is on them making their own work, I suppose, like the Eels and Darwin. But yeah, the sixth place Seagulls taking on the first place Broncos. Brisbane getting slapped around by the South Sydney Rabbitohs last week. Manly getting done in by the Titans. The Broncos heavy favourites here, but have some cracks been exposed for the Ponies?
Yeah, perhaps, but if I was a Manly supporter, I'd be up in arms as much as I've been up in arms with the Darwin Eels venture. I just don't see how they're in this scenario where they get to play one of their scheduled home games against the Broncos at Suncorp as part of Magic Round. It should have been coordinated in to be a Broncos home match. As it stands, then the Broncos get an extra.
Yeah, the Broncos been an away team in this fixture is insane to me.
Yeah, form dictates that it's the Broncos, and it's the Broncos easy.
Yeah, I think the Broncos, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least a passage of play where Manly have them not on the hooks, but maybe asking some questions. But I'll tip the Broncos here too. That brings us to Saturday, big fella, where action kicks off at 3:00 with the Warriors hosting the Panthers. New Zealand being one of the more pleasant surprise packets this year, playing some fantastic team-oriented football. Penrith, well, their struggles are sliding a little bit under the radar. They did just drop a game against the West Tigers, and they're on the same amount of wins as the Parramatta Eels, 60s, and yet one team is treated as a premiership favourite, understandably so, but the other team is like, the Eels going to make the finals? So I don't know. Penrith are tracking very bizarrely this year. Yeah,
there's... I think it's fair to say that they're missing Coruscant at dummy half, but you know, even in saying that, they've had to have periods of time where they've played without him, where they've played without other key players, even Cleary for periods last year, and they still were able to get the job done. Maybe it's just that hangover of winning 2 premierships in a row,
and the year before for the grand final, it's just been a long campaign for them.
Yeah, and it's hard to be up for such a period of time. So I'm not ruling out their chances of winning the competition this year. I just think that having that highly successful period in the regular rounds, like just so consistently successful, that's just such a hard grind to maintain. And maybe mentally they're just not into finding that way to win on a weekly basis that they have in the past. But they'll get the job done against the Warriors.
I'm springing for the upset here. Shans Nickel Clockstar back, Tohu Harris back. I just think the Warriors have it in them to not niggle, but be that ankle biter sort of dog in this fight that will drag the Panthers down and maybe grind out a victory.
Oh, I guess this will be the big pointer to where the Panthers' headspace is at, because I think they'll be deeply embarrassed by that loss to the Tigers.
That is probably a factor that I didn't consider, is how much you're going to be bouncing back from that. But I'm going to back the Warriors here. Brings us to the compliment sandwich game here, the one that's stuck in between the two, the curtain raiser and the main event. It's the Sharks versus the Dolphins, 2v9. Cronulla building nicely with the return of Nico Hines. The Dolphins, well, I won't say they've. It'd be way too unfair to say that they've sort of fallen off the tracks the last couple of rounds, given that they were done in controversially by Canberra, but they've been revelatory, I suppose, under Wayne Bennett's tutelage this year. This is a big game here because it gives the Sharks a chance to maybe open up some space on the top of the ladder, or for the Dolphins to get right back into the hunt for the top 2.
No, I think the Dolphins, I picked them to finish down near the bottom of the table. They've done a bit better than I thought they would. I think they've played above themselves so far this year. I think there's been some teams that have maybe underestimated them, especially with those comeback performances. Sharks win this easy.
Yeah, I tip the Sharks here too.
Sharks win 18 or more.
No Hamanuele is obviously a big out for the Sharks on the back of a hip drop tackle, I believe, but they get back Finucane, Tracy, a couple of players too, so they're looking in good shape. I definitely think the Sharks are the favourites here. Betting line reflects that. And then the big game to finish off Saturday night, Melbourne Storm in fourth, taking on the third place South Sydney Rabbitohs. The betting can't separate these two teams pretty much, but I think South deserve to be the favourites in this one.
Yeah, it's arguable that this is a home game for the Storm up in Queensland. At the start of the year, I honestly believe that South might be on the slide, and once more they've left me with egg on my face because they've just been quite dynamic, especially in recent weeks. But the Storm, mate, the Storm in Queensland. I have to go for the Storm in Queensland. I really do, because they made their home up in Queensland with COVID before it was really that bubble scenario, didn't they? And it was, and even after it came out, it was just.
And wasn't Parramatta one of them like famous streaks they snapped was the Storm's dominance in Queensland?
Yes, but they are just very, very comfortable playing up in Queensland.
And they tend to match up pretty favourably against South Sydney historically.
Yeah.
I am going to tip the Rabbitohs here. I just think they've got so much momentum, but I would not be surprised to see Melbourne get up.
Yeah, Storm by 6 for mine there.
Then we get to Sunday. There's 2 games before the Parramatta Eels take the field, starting with the West Tigers and Dragons in what must be said is close to a spoon bowl at 1:50 p.m. So the Dragons...
Imagine talking about a spoon bowl in, round 10? It's
almost clear cut, isn't it? I mean, the Cowboys are thereabouts too, and we'll talk about them in the next match. But the Dragons are trending downwards and fast. They're dropping players, shifting key players around. The coach, he knows he's a dead man walking. Like they're literally doing entrance interviews for potential coaching candidates while he's trying to coach without having been sacked yet. Versus the West Tigers, who are appointing key recruitment staff against not even against the wishes of their head of football, but without even informing him that it's happening. So the Tigers obviously the last start winners against Penrith. Will that kickstart something for them? I don't know. Everyone's talking up Paul. I say Paul because Jareem Buller is just a young kid playing fullback, and every time they talk about him, it's young superstar Jareem Buller, putting unfair expectations on this kid that's got a couple of caps to his name, and trying to build him up so they can cut him down.
There's a part of me that says, look, the common sense selection is that you've got the West Tigers on a bit of a high after their win last week, something that maybe you could argue they were building towards. And then you've got the Dragons, who must be right at the bottom of their psychological strengths.
Yeah, they're cratering out.
They are just, their confidence must be at an absolute low. And you think, surely the momentum, just from a mental perspective, is with the Tigers. And then you shock back into reality and you go, this is the Tigers.
Yep.
This is the team that, as you said, with the team starting to show that they've got something that they can offer, the off-field goes and makes an appointment without consultation. And it just, every now and again, that the organisation itself leaves you scratching your head. Like, if you're a Tigers supporter, you'd be beside yourself with some of the things that go on there. If they can isolate themselves from all the off-field crap that goes on around that club, they should get that job done. I'm going to select them, but nothing's going to surprise as an outcome.
Genuine coin toss game for me, so I'll go for it with heads being Tigers, tails being Dragons. It's a Dragons win.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with you. 17th versus 15th.
And the different degrees of drama on both sides, on and off the field, nightmare tip. I mean, this season has been a tipper's nightmare. This is embryonic of it right here in this game, where which of the two poisons do you pick? Brings us to the penultimate game, the 5th place Sydney Roosters taking on one of the huge disappointments this year in the 16th place Cowboys, another team battling it out for the spoon right now. Roosters, almost unbackable favourites, $1.25 versus $4 for the Cowboys. And I got to say, I know that the Cowboys have had a decent game or two against the Roosters in recent years, but this should be a win and a big win for the Tricolours.
If we play to form, then as you said, the Roosters get a massive win. The Cowboys are performing this year how I think a lot of people expected them to perform last year. Was last year an anomaly? All indicators right now are yes. The players who were standout performers last year are back to pre-2022 form. The breakout stars are barely a shadow of who they were. Yes, they've had some injury concerns, but if you were basing it on what they did last year, you'd say they are the biggest flop of the season thus far. Even for having the odd win here and there, they've just looked ordinary. They just really have. So Roosters easy.
Yeah, Roosters in a canter. I suppose the only wild card here is the Victor Radley factor and whether he gets sin-binned one or multiple times, maybe opening the way for the Cowboys to be competitive. But yeah, they just look bereft of direction, listless. And that rounds out Magic Round, boys.
No. I'm going to back the bye against the Knights. Because one of the crucial things about any matchup is that the team turns up to play.
I was about to say it's going to be an understrength for Newcastle.
The Knights aren't even in the country, so you got to back the bye in that one.
Yeah.
So the bye will just kick off, pick the ball up, and trot down the field. So game over.
Yeah, Newcastle, how they actually handle this bye is going to be fascinating because they come out of this one and take on the Gold Coast Titans at home. So that's not a layup or gimme game, but given the way they play, the Titans could absolutely put a pacing on them there too. So, yeah, very, very interesting. And for the Eels, they're on a road trip to the nation's capital next week, which we'll talk about obviously a week after this game. But yeah, got to get through the Titans first and got to get through this game without injury, equally importantly.
So just a reminder as well, come into Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels, and join us for that match between
pre-game, post-game coverage.
Titans.
So we'll be on about 5:30, 60s in the pre-game.
Yeah, about 5:30 in Jack's Bar and Grill. So come in, grab a feed, have something to drink, listen to the footy talk. We'll switch over to the main coverage of the game, and then immediately post-game we'll in with our instant reaction. But what we will do for people who are always curious about this is that if there's any Eels players being interviewed or the coach being interviewed, that sort of thing, we'll switch to the broadcast to get any of the takes that are coming straight from the game. So that we'll have that mix of our takes plus obviously you want to hear from the coach and the players whenever that's covered in the broadcast.
Yes, indeedy. So as always, thanks for tuning in and giving us a listen. Hope you enjoyed the extended preview coverage with some special guests there today. But we'll catch you on Sunday and in the next episode.
Go you Eels.